Hello everyone, and welcome to another Singerreise video podcast. My name is Jonathan Sylvia, and I'm your host. Thanks for joining us. This is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do about memorization. It's one of the topics that seems to come up over and over again. For example, after an opera. People will take a look at this heavy opera score. This one's Don Giovanni, coming up soon. And they'll wonder how it is that I managed to get through all of those hundreds of pages of music. It's also something that I've been working on very recently with all of the Winterreise videos that I'm doing. I'm performing all of them memorized. There's no hidden score off in the distance somewhere that I'm looking at when I do the videos. So memorization is a pretty big issue. For the most part, these videos on memorization are from one singer to other singers. It's about the best practices of being a successful singer, or the tricks of the trade. If you're not a singer, or you're not a student of singing, I hope that you find these videos interesting. And we definitely want to hear back from you if you have insight on memorization as well. In this first video about memorization, we'll talk about what it means to be memorized, and what it means to be not memorized. We'll also take a look at the industry standards for when you're expected to be memorized and when memorization is perhaps not as expected. In later videos, we'll take a look at how I go about memorizing, and hopefully in a third video, we'll take a look at some other techniques for memorization. So let's get started. A couple of terms come up when we start talking about memorization in the singer environment. We talk about being on book and off book. On book literally means that there's a book in your hand and you're not memorized. Being off book means that you're performing without any book in your hands. Let's start with off book, or memorized. Being off book means that you can roll out of bed, perform the entire role, and do it despite whatever distractions there might be. If, on the other hand, you have only made it through the role once, memorized without mistakes, and that was in a complete distraction-free zone, then that's only quasi-memorized, and that's not going to work. You need to keep going, keep doing it over and over again until it gets into a longer-term memory. So let's talk about being on book. On book means that you are performing with a physical score in your hand. However, this isn't the opposite of performing off book, without a score. In fact, when you have the score, you still have to be very, very well prepared for the performance. In fact, most singers aim for a mostly memorized state. This allows them to be able to look out of this score while they are singing and communicate with the conductor and communicate with the audience, despite the presence of the score being there. In fact, the score is really only there as a backup if you're not sure of what line comes next. So how do you know when you're supposed to be on book or off book? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the various singing situations and take a look at what the industry standards are for each of them. Let's start with opera. For a fully staged opera, the expectation is that you will be performing off book, that is memorized. But it goes a little bit further than that. You are expected to be memorized by the start of the very first rehearsal. And there are almost no exceptions to this. If you show up unmemorized, you did not prepare for your role. In fact, most companies reserve the right to cancel your contract if you show up unprepared. Even if they don't use that right, and if they don't cancel your contract, you'll still be letting down all of your other colleagues, all of your fellow performers. So try not to be that singer. When it comes to opera, there's another little something that I kind of find interesting. That's the subject of prompters. This only really applies for the very largest of opera houses. In fact, I've only heard of prompters being used at the Metropolitan. But in this case, a prompter is a person that sits in a box, either in the orchestra pit or just off stage, that will yell your line to you just before you sing it. Now, the acoustics of the house are such that the prompter can't be heard by the audience, but for you on stage, you can hear the prompter. Now, at this level, of course, you are still expected to show up knowing your part inside and out. You are expected to be fully memorized. If you show up and don't know your stuff, you'll be out of the job in a split second, and there will be somebody to replace you within moments. So again, the prompter is just there as a safeguard. And again, it really only shows up for the very largest of houses. Just for the record, I have never used a prompter, but I have seen it specified that I will be performing a role without a prompter, which is kind of interesting. Let's take a look at another common scenario, doing concert work. In this case, concert work is typically the large work or master work or an oratorio. It usually involves a handful of soloists, plus a chorus and an orchestra. In most cases, concert work is done on book. That means you are expected to have your score with you. Again though, even when you're performing on book, you need to be mostly memorized. That way, when the performance itself comes, you're not making stupid mistakes because you didn't prepare well enough, and it means that you're not staring at your score the entire time. Every now and then, a conductor will want you to perform memorized. But because this is the exception to the rule, it is usually spelled out in the contract well in advance of the first rehearsal. If you're getting mixed signals from the company, however, make sure to clarify ahead of time which it's going to be. Now, if you arrive at the first rehearsal unmemorized and ready to perform off book, but they want you to be memorized, well, then you usually don't have enough time to finish off the memorization. And you may wind up needing to be a tough singer on this one. You have to simply inform the company that you will be performing on book. It's better to perform on book and have a good performance than to try and perform memorized when you're not prepared for that and risk a poor performance. Now here's a confusing one, concert opera. These are full operas or parts of operas that are performed without a set and without costumes and without all that much staging. They're usually done in churches or in concert halls instead of on an opera theater. So because these are a cross between concert and opera, it can really go either way in terms of whether it's going to be memorized or whether it's going to be unmemorized. So in most cases, you want to clarify ahead of time. An opera is a pretty long thing to memorize in most cases. Here's a warning sign. If they're calling this a semi-staged production or a fully staged concert production, chances are that they're going to expect you to be memorized, even though you're going to be performing in your own concert gown. Here's a few more scenarios. Contests. Nearly all contests are performed memorized. This applies whether you're doing art song or opera arias or even music theater pieces. You're usually expected to perform memorized. Another one is recitals. Recitals are always performed memorized. But recitals are a lot like a concert. The major difference between a recital and a concert, however, is where the focus is. If the focus is on the singer, usually is one singer performing a multitude of works, or sometimes it can be a couple of singers, or there's also the recital for an entire voice studio. All of these are performed memorized. But the focus is still on the singer, rather than being on the masterwork or the orchestra or the choir that a singer is joining. Finally, there's choral work. Choral work, at least on the professional level, is always done with a book. Now, not always. There are some exceptions. Those exceptions are usually when there is some choreography involved or some pageantry. Examples of this might be Anuna, who frequently performs on tours, and they have a lot of stage choreography. Another choreography-heavy performing group are carolers and barbershop choruses. Another exception might be the high school choir, but in that case, it's a choir that's not oriented around performing per se as it is around training. And of course, going through the practice of memorizing is good training for young singers. So if you're in a high school choir and you're trying to perform with a book in your hand, go with what your teacher says and don't get me in trouble. And that sums up all of the scenarios that I can think of for memorization. I'm sure there's some other ones out there. Now, in the next video, I'm going to talk about how I go about memorizing things, like how I've gone and memorized all of these songs for Winterreise, or how I memorize an opera. In the third video, however, I'm going to need a little bit of help. In the third video, I'm going to talk about how everybody else does it, and hopefully we'll have a lot of ideas to work with. You can take part in that. Send me your emails, your comments, your thoughts. you can do so on my blog, Singerreise.com, or you can comment here on YouTube with this video, for example. You can also comment on the Facebook feed. I'd love to have some feedback from you. You can also be a member at Patreon and financially supporting these videos. So I'd love to get lots and lots of feedback from you about what are your favorite techniques for memorization. And I'll sum them all up in the third video. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.